Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Sunday, May 28th, 2023, and the Memorial Day weekend is here. I want to pass along, though, a very important change notice. If you haven't already heard the Alaska Weather Show, we have a change coming up of significance. The last TV broadcast of Alaska weather, at least in the traditional sense, over the airwaves, will be on Saturday, June 30th. Starting on July 1st, the National Weather Service will provide a modified web-based version of the program on a new YouTube channel. And we will be moving on YouTube from at AKwx TV to at NWS Alaska. So you can go ahead and sign up now to get on that particular channel. We will not yet be posting content like this until July 1st. And we are in the midst of a public comment period now that runs through July 30th. So if you have any concerns, special comments you wish to make, you can send those to nws.service-change-comments@noaa.gov. And if you have any other questions, you can reach carrie.haisley at noaa.gov and donald.moore@noaa.gov. And again, today, May 28th, we are looking for across the continental U.S. If you want additional weather information, go to weather.gov. The map shows only real couple areas of active weather. We have red flag warning for critical fire weather conditions in the eastern Dakotas and northwestern Minnesota. And then back here out along the Sierra, the east side of the Sierra, including Lake Tahoe area, we have flash flood watches for the potential for thunderstorms to produce heavy downpours and cause flash flooding on some of the burn scars from recent wildfires in the past few years. The upper Yukon River, though, is very slowly beginning to recede, especially from Dawson City down through Fort Yukon. As we're coming out of the Yukon Flats, Stevens Village still under a flood warning, still some extensive lowland flooding along the Yukon there. And then we have flood advisories from Grayling all the way down to the Delta. And in the Delta, Imanak and Alakanuk still have the possibility of ice jam flooding, and there is an ice jam warning, or I should say a flood warning for ice jams in that section of the river. And we're going to get some moderate to heavy rainfall across areas of the east central interior. Starting late this Sunday night through Memorial Day into Tuesday. Eastern Alaska Range, 40-mile gold country. So again, soggy and cool, temperatures only in the 40s to lower 50s. Some warmer temperatures, though, may begin to build into the panhandle after the 4th. I'd say centered around the 6th, and a little after that. Some of that warmer air may actually build back up into the east central interior. So we'll have to wait and see if that actually signals a bit of a pattern shift. But otherwise, this Sunday afternoon early on, partly sunny there up in the lower end of the Yukon Flats at Beaver. You can see the high water levels there along the Yukon. Temperature, though, at 63, one of the warmer areas in the state. Kotlik down in the Delta of the Yukon, partly sunny, only in the lower 40s, 42 as of early afternoon. And then Delta Junction, one of the areas that could get in on some moderate to heavier rain showers here, especially as we go through later tonight and on Monday. We do have some areas of rain and rain showers there this afternoon with a temperature only at 49 degrees. Yakutat also getting rain showers, and 46 in areas of the northeastern Gulf Coast and Panhandle will also be experiencing some rain here for the holiday weekend. So as far as river breakup is concerned, the threat of ice jam flooding has pretty much ended here in the southern areas of the state, south of the Brooks Range. There's still the potential, though, in the far end of the Yukon Delta, Imanuk, Alakanuk, those areas there still could have ice jam flooding, and then flood advisories up the river there all the way up to Anvik and Grayling. And then we have a flood warning for snowmelt flooding still holding in effect there at Stevens Village, and we expect some heavier rainfall here could cause creeks and some of the smaller rivers to rise, especially the Chena River and sections of the Tanana that feed the Tanana Basin because of that heavier rain that's going to be setting up here over the next 12 to 36 hours. But that's going to knock down the fire danger. One good thing about this cloudier, cooler, and wetter weather that we're seeing. Unlike last year when it was so dry and warm, we had massive wildfires out in the southwest and also fires breaking out in through the east central interior. Things are going to be dampened by this weather pattern at least into early June, so that's one benefit of this particular cooler and occasionally wet pattern. Now, on the satellite imagery, there is a low pressure here in the northwestern Gulf. It's pulling moisture up to the north and then back northwestward, so that's what's going to feed that area of heavier rain, especially along and on the north side of the Alaska Range up through the 40-mile country and then back toward Fairbanks. We have cooler temperatures and some showers, too, also down along the length of the Yukon River, especially back toward the Delta. And a cold front will be pushing in from the northwest from out of eastern Russia as we go into the early week. So there's the low this afternoon. By the time we get into late tonight, early on Memorial Day, the low sits there in the northwestern Gulf, and just moisture is going to rotate around this as old frontal systems kind of push inland and wash out and just become troughs. But here's a push of cooler air here coming in from eastern Russia, and by Monday afternoon, that front will be right along the northwestern coast through the Bering Strait. We still have the low just kind of sitting and spinning there in the west side of the Gulf, and again, moisture feed that just comes up into the east central interior. So the area here seeing much cooler temperatures in the 40s to lower 50s and some bouts of moderate to heavy rain. And into Tuesday, things still continuing to be, rain maybe not quite as heavy in the east central interior, but there's just a series of waves of energy and lows that just kind of rotate and take the place of one low with another, and we're going to see that pattern with the low just kind of generally spinning in this region. So no real changes in terms of cloud cover and chances of occasional, at least some light rain in most areas. Temperatures stay above freezing, above 40 in the Panhandle and across much of South Central. Daytime highs, though, are going to be kept down by cloud cover and either areas of rain or scattered showers. Places, say, back through Anchorage, and that could be spit at with a little bit of rain. But again, most of the rain being up as we go up into the east central interior. And temperatures Tuesday morning very similar. Not a lot of variation between night and day. High temperatures, though, Tuesday afternoon only lower mid 50s Panhandle. Same thing here across Copper River Basin down through the Kenai and Anchorage Bowl. In the north, readings stay above freezing along the Yukon River, generally above 40. We do have temperatures near or just below freezing along the Arctic coast, back down through Kotzebue Sound and into the north side of the Seward Peninsula. Temperatures Monday afternoon will be warmest up toward Fort Yukon. Bettles could see temperatures in the 60s. But areas where it's a little thicker cloud cover, steadier rain, even 52 might be a bit of a push there for places like Tok and around Delta Junction. And then Tuesday morning lows generally near or a bit above 40 through the Yukon Valley, but again, below freezing, upper 20s along the north side of the Seward Peninsula, Wales all the way on up here to Point Lay and Utqiagvik to Kaktovik. And then temperatures Tuesday afternoon should get back up. Still cooler, though, than what they were Monday. 64-ish there in Fort Yukon, but otherwise 50s dominate elsewhere, only mid-upper 30s along the Arctic coast. And in the southwest, we expect temperatures there overnight to generally be above freezing. And for Monday afternoon, still mainly in the 40s, staying below 40, Bethel, Anvik down through the Yukon Delta. And Tuesday morning, lows near freezing in a few spots, but generally just above it. And then temperatures Tuesday afternoon stay cool, highs only maybe near or lower 40s. Looking at the temperature outlook, though, as we get past the first 3-4 days of June, This ridge is going to try and build up into western Canada. Where the axis sets up going to depend how warm or hot it gets, but should see warmer temperatures develop across the Panhandle and then nudge up into the eastern interior, maybe even further north toward the North Slope. But it stays near or slightly below normal south central, centered on Cook Inlet and the Kenai Peninsula. Precipitation should generally be near normal, northeastern mainland down through the Panhandle, maybe slightly below, with a little bit above normal precipitation, but not by much, across areas of the southwest mainland.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Here's your aviation weather. If you have a flight planned early this week, Monday and Tuesday, extensive IFR conditions along the Arctic coast for lower ceilings and areas of low clouds and fog. We have a cold front pushing across the Chukchi Sea into the northwestern coast and west side of the state. Broad area of IFR conditions from the Bering Strait all throughout the Bering Sea and the Aleutian Chain. We also have IFR conditions along areas of the Alaska Range and in through the northeastern Gulf Coast, especially the intercoastal mountains extending there in through the intercoastal mountains of the Panhandle. Monday afternoon, we expect IFR conditions to be widespread, especially along the eastern central Bering and again across the Aleutian Chain, north side of the Alaska Peninsula, holding on to areas of the northeastern Gulf Coast, northern Panhandle, intercoastal mountains, and a broad area of precipitation to and through areas of the central, east central portions of the interior. Some of these ceilings could be locally lower as the result of some moderate to locally heavier rain. And then on Tuesday morning, IFR conditions will be extensive along the Arctic coast, again through the lower Chukchi Sea, Bering Strait, Seward Peninsula, all along the southwest coast and into the interior, the southeastern Bering Sea, the entire Aleutian Chain, and on up especially along the Bering side of the Alaska Peninsula. Tuesday afternoon conditions should be a little better out toward along the Alcan border. MVFR conditions anticipated through the Panhandle. Still IFR though once you get out past west there of Dutch Harbor and on through much of the central and western Aleutians. Pass conditions on Monday, Anaktuvik Pass, MVFR conditions there along the east central Brooks Range becoming VFR. Adigan also MVFR to VFR conditions there by later morning afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill will be socked in with IFR conditions early in the day, giving way to MVFR. Same thing as we round the Alaska Range, Rainy Pass, Windy Pass, eastward to Isabel Pass. We expect IFR conditions early, giving way to MVFR conditions. And again, there'll be areas of precipitation, some rain across much of the Alaska Range and on up through the 40-mile Gold Country, in through the central and eastern portions of the Yukon Valley. Metasta Pass VFR, though MVFR conditions will exist as you fly across the Copper River Basin. Tanita Pass MVFR conditions are expected as well. And Portage Pass, also MVFR conditions. And then the northeastern Gulf Coast, especially there from around Yakutat eastward through the northern Panhandle, we expect IFR conditions at Chilkoot and White Passes. And looking at the freezing levels aloft, they are lower here across areas of the northern Panhandle and far southern Yukon. They do bump up to around and just above 6,000 feet through the central Yukon Valley and through the Yukon Flats. And then we find a colder pool of air aloft over the Alaska Peninsula as an area of low pressure is just going to kind of reside here over the western, northwestern Gulf. And the greatest threat for some icing, you get up into the cloud layer, there's going to be some areas of moderate to locally heavier rainfall at times throughout this region along the eastern half of the Alaska Range, 40-mile Gold Country, and even bumping up along the south side of the Brooks Range. And then there also could be some areas of considerable moderate icing above 5,000 feet over portions of the Panhandle. And looking at the jet stream level winds, this is 30,000 foot level. We have a low circulation over the northern Gulf. Another one up here toward the Chukchi Arctic Ocean area, and a cold front It'll be pushing in with stronger winds on the backside of that. As we get down to 700 millibars, 9,000 feet, we can see the low circulation there over the northwestern Gulf. Trough associated with the surface cold front that's going to be pushing into the northwestern quadrant of the mainland. And then as we bring it down to 3,000 feet, we find there's that trough again, and associated with the surface cold front that's going to be pushing eastward. Low pressure still residing there just off the Kenai coast over the northwestern Gulf, and winds off of the southwestern coast, Nunavik Island back towards St. Matthew, upwards of 40 knots from the northwest to north. And then we also see some winds of 35 to 40 knots just south of the Gulf there over portions of the North Pacific. So the greatest threat of turbulence on Monday is going to be out along the Alaska Peninsula through at least the central Aleutians. Surface to 3,000 feet there in the Aleutians, and surface to 4,000 feet across the lower portion there of the Alaska Peninsula, and as a result of just a broad northwesterly flow.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and joining us once again is Eric Stevens, our good friend from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at UAF. And thanks for joining us, Eric. Really appreciate it.
Oh, happy to be here, Dave.
And we love to hear about all the fascinating developments, new and old, and how we're using the tools here, especially around Alaska. And I've got to think that, satellite meteorology right now is a fascinating time to be involved in. If we go back to the first satellite, Tyros back in 1960, I think is when we got some of those first pictures. Weather and meteorology probably changed that day for a whole lot of people, and it's still changing today, right?
Oh, you know it. Satellite imagery is so important, and it's getting better all the time. Yeah. Of course, never perfect, but especially for us in Alaska, where there are other data sets like radars and weather balloons are so thinly spread. Right. The satellite is the great equalizer because the satellite sees everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We've got one particular issue in volcanic ash detection.
That's a big deal here. Yeah.
You know it. If you fly an airplane into volcanic ash, your jet engine might just fail. And an airplane without engines is in a world of hurt.
Sure.
So if there's a volcano that goes off, satellite imagery is the way to track that plume of ash and to tell pilots this is where you need to not be to avoid this ash plume. And there's a phrase out there, what's the difference? What's the difference?
Okay.
Well, it turns out, what we're going to discuss today, that the difference is everything. There's a technique called channel differencing.
Okay.
That if you take one piece of the spectrum of what the satellite detects and a slightly different wavelength of that spectrum, even though those two images might look similar, magical things happen when you subtract one from the other, and they reveal information that was already there, but it was hard to find until you did that subtraction.
That sounds like Nicolas Cage in National Treasure when he's got those fancy glasses and he's flipping one up and back and forth. I mean, is this what we're talking about?
Well, let's go more highbrow and talk Michelangelo.
Oh,
so apparently Michelangelo made some amazing sculpture, and someone said, Michael, that's amazing. How did you do it? And Michelangelo's reply allegedly was, well, in that rock, the statue was already in there.
Right.
I just scraped away the unnecessary bits. In satellite meteorology, sometimes there are meteorological features that are in the data, but you can't see it until you combine or difference some of the channels.
Okay.
And we've got a case, good old Pavlov volcano goes off now and then.
Sure.
And you can observe directly a picture of the volcano. Just take it with your iPhone. You can see a volcano going off.
Yep.
Right. But if you want to get the broad view, we need satellite to do that. Now, there are a couple of wavelengths that we can look at. So what's a wavelength? That's the amount of space between a peak and a valley and another peak in a certain part of the electromagnetic spectrum. We're going to look at 12 micron wavelength and 10.8 micron wavelength.
What is a micron?
So what's a micron? Yeah, we're getting into the geek department now. A micron is a unit of length, and it is quite tiny. We're looking at what's called long wave wavelengths.
Okay.
But it takes 25,000 of these microns to make an inch. A human blood cell is about 5 microns across. So when we're talking about 12 micron imagery as allegedly long wave, well, that's relative.
Pretty short for light.
Yeah, it's other part of the, it's just an expression for the the spectrum there.
Okay.
So we can look at a 12 micron image, say a satellite image. At 12 microns, we're seeing a heat signature here, really. And the way this color enhancement works is the yellow and the red stuff is high cold clouds down here over the Gulf of Alaska into South Central. And if you were asked, where do you find the volcanic ash plume in this image?
Hey, where do you find the volcanic plume in this image?
It's hard to do. I'm not sure I could find it. If you were to look at this image and just say, show me what jumps out at you here, I'd say, well, nothing really. Well, let's look. So 12 micron doesn't help us. Let's look at 10.8 microns.
All right.
All right, look at that. It's practically the same image. So where's this volcanic ash? Can't find it at 12 microns, can't really see it at 10.8, but when we subtract one channel from the other, magically the plume appears. The color enhancement here highlights the ash in blue.
Wow.
The information was already there, but we couldn't find it until we subtracted one channel from another.
Very interesting.
It's almost magical. Similarly, let's say you're looking for fog up on the North Slope. It's kind of a foggy neighborhood.
Sure.
In 11 micron and 3.9 micron, we've got a 3.9 micron image here. It's a big fuzzy blur over Barrow. We can't see where the fog is. But the information is lurking in there waiting for us to reveal it. All we have to do is find that difference between the 11 micron and the 3.9, and then this image becomes this image, and the fog bank jumps right out, and you can see it up there at Barrow. Now, you got to choose the right tool for the job.
Sure.
Like they say, you open your toolbox, all kinds of stuff in there. What do we need for this particular task? If you want to find volcanic ash, we look at 12 and 10.8 micron, find that difference. If you want to find fog, we'll look at 11 and 3.9 micron, find that difference. It's great, different tools for different jobs. Of course, there's always caveats and gotchas, but this fog procedure, it only works at night, because when the sun comes up, it gets in the way. So every product has its strengths and limitations, and in meteorology, the challenge is using the right tool for the right job, and these are some of those tools.
And discovery is still happening, even with meteorology. The weather's been around for a long time, but the tools that are being developed to understand the meteorology is fascinating and still very new science.
It's such a young science. We've come so far. I'm getting old enough now that I can literally say that, when I was a boy, we didn't have this kind of thing. And there's new things happening all the time. New satellites will be launched in coming years that will have better instruments than ever before. It's an exciting time, and this is so helpful for Alaska, because satellites help fill in the gaps between other ways of observing the weather. Satellite's the great equalizer for Alaska.
Yeah, and help so many people stay safe in so many ways every day up here in the last frontier.
Yeah, that's what it's all about, protecting lives and property.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Eric. We love to hear about this fascinating information, and boy, it just makes me want to go watch satellite pictures all day. So hopefully we're inspiring more people to do the same thing, and just be curious. It's a wonderful thing. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and starting with the sea ice, we have extensive ice again along areas of the Arctic coast east of Aviation through Kaktovik, though the ice is opening here along the northwestern coastline from Wainwright down through the Bering Strait and through areas of eastern Norton Sound and along the northwest and south sides of St. Lawrence Island. Further south across the central and northern portion of the Bering Sea, the pack ice there also shrinking in coverage and melting, and we expect that to continue, seeing that we are now just under 4 weeks away from summer solstice. And looking at the marine forecast for the southeast panhandle, inner channels, winds will be out of the south to east. Strongest winds there across Stevens Passage could gust as high as 35 knots. Waves running 3 to 4 feet. Inner channels, the outer coast, kind of a stalled out boundary that's through this region. South winds 15 to 20 knots, waves running 7 to 8 feet on Monday. And then for Tuesday, south to southeast winds 15 knots for the inner channels, waves generally 3 feet. For the outer nearshore waters here of the outer coast, winds will be turning more easterly around 15 knots, falling off to near 10 knots there, especially near and west of Yakutat. Waves running 6 to 7 feet. In the northwestern Gulf, we've had Low circulating here in this general area over the course of the weekend, and it will continue to do so, though weaken. Winds easterly in Prince William Sound with 3-foot waves, variable winds up here on the north end of Cook Inlet. But on the south end, at the entrance of Cook Inlet and north of Kodiak Island, winds will be westerly 15 to 20 knots. And for Tuesday, look for southeast winds 10 knots within Prince William Sound with waves running a couple of feet. Easterly winds off the Kenai at 15 knots with 3-foot waves. Winds will generally have a southeast to southerly component and running up the length there of Cook Inlet, and waves running 3 to maybe as high as 5 feet there just west of Anchor Point. Across the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, winds will be west to northwest 20 knots, waves 3 to 5 feet on the North Pacific side, and running right around 5-6 feet on the Bering side. And for Tuesday, look for west to southwest winds around Kodiak Island at 15 knots, and then they become more northwesterly once you get from the middle peninsula down toward the eastern Aleutians at 20 to 25 knots there north of Cold Bay, where the highest waves north there of the Cold Bay and the Bering up to 9 feet. The Aleutian chain on Monday will generally have west winds along the entire chain near 20 knots. Waves on the North Pacific side running 5 to 7 feet, and on the Bering side, generally 5 or 6 feet, so winds not especially strong for that location. And then on Tuesday, eastern Aleutians will see northwesterly winds at 20 to 25 knots. Waves could be as high as 8 feet there outside of Dutch Harbor on Alaska. As we go further west, look for winds to be a bit more variable west of Adak, 10 to 15 knots, and then trying to turn back toward the south-southeast, far western Aleutians at 20 to 25 knots with waves there of 4 to 5 feet. Along the southwest coast, winds will generally have a southwesterly component around 20 knots with 4-foot waves north and sound and off the lower Yukon Delta, 3 to 4-foot waves into areas of Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays. And then on Tuesday, winds turn back more northerly, north and sound and along the lower Yukon Delta. And then northwesterly, Nunavik Island, St. Lawrence, down through St. Paul and St. George at 25 knots with waves 5 to 8 feet. And then finally, along the Arctic coast, kind of a mixed bag of winds around 10 knots, but the ice still there in place. We have openings through the lower Chukchi Sea, and the wind is going to turn more southerly to 20 knots, even down through the Bering Strait to the north side there of St. Lawrence Island. And waves where there is some open water could be as high as 4 to near 5 feet. And then on Tuesday, easterly winds along the far northern Arctic coast, 10 to 15 knots, Kaptovik through Utqiagvik. And then coming down through the lower Chukchi Sea, those winds will be west to northwest, especially from around Cape Lisburne and Point Hope southward to the Bering Strait. South of the Bering Strait, winds will be north to northwest, 25 knots, including the north side of St. Lawrence Island and into Norton Sound, with waves running 4 to as high as 6 feet. So Monday afternoon, Memorial Day, we have a low pressure that continues to sit and weaken over the western Gulf, frontal bands that have weakened and pushed inland with some moderate to heavier rain, areas of the east central portion of the interior, and another wave of lows just kind of continue to rotate around through the Gulf here as we go through the upcoming week.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.